and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and today we're talking with Thorsten Theilow, the DP of the film Boys State, which is a documentary about a week-long sort of summer camp almost, political summer camp in Texas, where the high school-aged boys are split up into two different mock political groups, and then they have to come up with agenda items and all kinds of things. And it's supposed to get them ready for jobs in government. And so it is a fascinating look at the mind of kids today, high school boys today, which I was one at a point. And so seeing what has changed and what hasn't was fascinating. I did not grow up in Texas. I grew up in the Bay Area of California, so the local politics are slightly different, but boys kind of universally have very similar characteristics across the board generally. But it's a really good documentary, and sometimes can make you angry, sometimes can make you happy, as any good film does. And so highly recommend you seek it out. Let's see, I did not turn on my camera for the first 2 minutes, so you'll have to, if you're watching this, sorry. You may notice a couple cuts just because Thor was walking around his house, kind of operating around his family that was working at home. So hopefully you don't even notice, but I figured I should say it up front just in case you do. As always, try to keep this short. Please enjoy this conversation with Thorsten Theilow. The documentary was really, I've said this about a couple other documentaries that have come by my desk, but very affecting. The first, the first 10 minutes really got me like, that's the mark of a good documentary. I was like angry. And then, it's like, okay, there's nuance. Oh God. How did you get involved with this project?
So we're talking Boys State, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jesse Moss and I had worked on about, I think, 4 previous films together. And we love working together. I love working with Jesse, and we both have, I guess, we love sort of intimate verite filmmaking and small crews. That's about building connections with people and forming relationships. And so we bonded over that, and we kept working together on projects. And then when this project came on, I think we're actually on a shoot for a different project, and we knew this might happen, but then we got a final final green light from the American Legions. Then they said, you're in, you can shoot. And we hopped on a plane and we flew to Texas and started casting people immediately. It was a huge job because, how do you find the most compelling people amongst 1,300 kids?
Yeah, and they're all high school boys.
And they're all high school boys. And we knew that they had their own selection process that was already, coming to an end. And we wanted to certainly capture some of that too. So we had to rush. And we just jumped in.
How many people were on the crew?
So it began as just me and Jesse for the casting. For maybe 10 days, we crisscrossed around Texas, and Amanda did an amazing job talking to people on the phone and sort of filtering out kids. And then Amanda came to Texas, and we did another round of more intense casting, and filmed a bit more with people we really liked or resonated with us. And then the actual event was 6 days, and we had 7 cinematographers.
Okay.
And the way that worked was the way we wanted this to work is we wanted to attach one cinematographer to one subject. so they could form a relationship from the beginning, and they would just know that that cinematographer isn't going away. They will follow them for the whole experience. And then we had sound people, a few producers, an assistant. So I would estimate maybe 20 people total for the week of the actual event.
So it was just 1 week that you guys were filming, essentially.
I mean,
for like the bulk of it.
The bulk of it, yeah. You like the the opening credits. You see some of the selection process. We filmed more. Some of that didn't make it in the film, in during the casting process, conversations boys had, and but some of the stuff like with Steven campaigning,
Right.
that happened all before. But the bulk of the film is 6 days, and it anyway.
I was just gonna say it feels like a marathon. Like that could have been 6 days or 6 weeks.
I know. It was a marathon. It was a marathon. And if you look at it just with the number, seven shooters for 6 days, that's a lot of shoot days, but it's also not that much shoot days.
Yeah.
For a feature documentary. But it was a marathon. We had a war room where everybody had the equipment and everybody came in and out, and the producers had a huge board on the wall with all the events that we wanted to cover and the movement and making sure we're not missing stuff. And it was quite an undertaking. It's overwhelming.
Yeah, that's a very for such a seemingly militaristic style of mentality for the kids, that kind of is how you guys had to approach it. I would assume very like regimented, like, all right, B unit go this way, A unit go this way, C unit go that way. Report back here with full cards.
Yeah. Some of that was like that, yeah. But a lot of it was intuitive because we had a pretty clear idea that one cinematographer would follow one character, and so there were sometimes additional events where we pull people when there wasn't much happening, but for the most part we had a pretty good guarantee that we won't miss much if each of our characters had a camera on them at all times.
Sure. How long did it take for the kids to kind of get used to cameras following them? Because especially I always think about like the history of filmmaking in various forms. And one of those things was like, if you watch the earliest films, the hand cranked ones, people are just locked into they've never seen one before. And then in the middle, we're all kind of used to it. And then now with like the internet generation, they're all back locked into it because they think they're going to be on the internet, and not like a home movie.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting question. We did worry about exactly that, like the Instagram and what is the other app? I don't even have it.
TikTok's the big one now.
TikTok is a big one now. Like generation where like everybody's going to look into the camera, but it didn't take much time, and it's often the case with people in general. But because they were boys, and because I think their experience was so overwhelming to them to navigate this world, that first most characters already had a camera on them before. They knew us, and they knew the people they were attached to, the cinematographers. And there's moments when like one of our characters walks into the room, and kids that hadn't seen a camera like, wait, what is that? But it was also made clear to all the kids on the first day in all the orientation that there's going to be cameras. And so it wasn't much. It was they pretty quickly forgot about the camera, which was beautiful to see.
Did you notice a sort of emotional change with any of the kids? Like, did they perk up and start performing in a certain way, or were they really just being themselves? Because that's another problem you can worry about with documentaries, I would assume, is the camera changes the way that the subject interacts with their world, let alone you.
Right. That is so hard to tell. Like, does the camera make a difference? Yes, absolutely. It does alter reality, right? Like, did some of the kids maybe perform or act up? Absolutely. And yet, I think there are so many raw moments that those are the moments that stand out.
Yeah.
It's often hard to tell.
Especially without knowing them beforehand.
Without knowing them, yeah.
What were your camera packages?
We had so we needed, because it was so spread out over the entire campus. It was lots of walking, lots of sort of distance, miles of walking per day for the kids to get from the dorms to the meeting rooms and whatever to the Capitol. We needed to have a camera that's small and where a cinematographer can function a full day without an assistant. There wasn't going to be somebody that hands you a lens or a battery or media. So everybody had a little fanny pack, a C300 Mark II rigged out for whoever, like however people wanted them. Most of the packages, I think all of them were small, like tiny, and some media, one lens. We shot the whole film on 135 prime that was dialed into an f2, and yeah, and some media. That was it. A good mic, a stereo mic on board. It was tiny.
It's interesting. The whole film was shot on a 35 prime.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing I noticed is what was the decision behind the 2:40 aspect ratio? Because the whole time I was sitting here, I was like, this is a very cinematic documentary, and it's of course you shot it on a prime.
Right. I mean, I think we had sort of a 4-stage decision-making process for the visuals. One was how do you make a film that is its own visual piece of art and has sort of a continuity visually if you have 7 shooters. And even though a lot of the people that worked in the film I know, and part of them was a part of this small cinematographer collective, and we worked together before on many projects, and we have similar sensibilities, but everybody still shoots slightly different.
Right.
And I've seen the documentaries where they had, shot a ballpark of a documentary with like 5-6 cameras, and it's really hard to pull that off in a way that it doesn't feel like a patchwork visually in the end. And so I pushed very hard. I shoot a lot on primes, even for Verite, and I love the way that a prime lens acknowledges the presence of the camera in a different way than a zoom lens does, because it's more honest in a way, because you're right there. And the viewer sees that. You feel that in the film, that if you're like right behind somebody, it's a different energy than when you're in the corner and you're zooming in.
Yeah.
And so the prime makes you explore angles more and be more present in the space. And I love that, because you move, instead of just zooming in and out, you move around in space. You get more angles. You think more cinematically. You get overs, you get wides, you move around. And I think that resonated with Jesse, and we've done some Verite shooting in that fashion on previous films. So we wanted it to look cinematic, and so we decided we're going to try to make it visually coherent through limitation of that one lens. We're not going to give everybody a zoom lens,
right?
And we're also made it an obligation to shoot at an f2. So you're not going to get, sure, like if you're a little closer to somebody, the depth of field changes slightly, of course, like even in a feature film, you see that, but you're not going to get, some of the stuff looks flat, some of the stuff looks cinematic. It's going to be one f-stop, just like, a DP and a director rate a feature film at a certain f-stop before they start shooting. And that's what they shoot most of the shots with, as much as they can. And then the widescreen was partly informed through some of the casting we did and scouting at the locations, and we understood quickly that it's going to be a lot of problematic locations with no windows, overhead lights. It wasn't cinematic. And we filmed a bunch of conversations that happened around the application process in some of the universities in Texas, with kids sort of supervised talking about issues of our times. and they sit around tables, they sit all over the place. And so we experimented with that format, and we saw that if you're so wide in your frame, it's really beautiful how you can have 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 kids, if they sit around a table, in the same shot. And you can play with the focus and the way you tell the story and where you're sharp, but you still see reactions of what that person is saying on the side. So it becomes a more holistic image of what you're getting. And we love that. And so to be able to do that, to see more happening in the frame and see people reacting to other people without having to shoot an over was really interesting to us. And then also just, you don't need to see the overheads, just cut them out. You know what I mean? No need. And then we shot the whole casting with that aspect ratio. We cut a sizzle. We had no time. We had like a little bit of funding for a sizzle to get really approval, and we put the bars on the top and the bottom, and we submitted that, and everybody was like, "Oh my god, I'm watching a movie. This looks like you're watching a film." And so everybody loved it, and we went for it.
There is that's definitely something that I think about a lot in my own work. Is like there's, especially online, but there's a lot of conversation about like what is cinematic, and I think a lot of it has to do, there's overt strokes, like a 2:40 aspect ratio, or in some cases, anamorphic flares or something. But there's more subtle ways to manipulate the viewer into thinking they're watching a movie. And shooting on primes is definitely one of them. Shot selection, when you cut, what does Fincher say? It's about what you don't do. We're not going to use zooms on this. We're not going to show the overheads. And it is funny because it took me as a filmmaker, it took me probably the first 10 minutes to realize it was in 2:40.
Is that right?
Yeah, I got sucked in.
What movies do you make?
Right now, I mean, shit. Mostly commercials, fashion stuff, music videos. The classic. I don't have a real job yet.
Amazing. Well, you at least you're making the big bucks, I hope, with the commercial.
Not commercials. Local commercials. At least for LA, they're a little bit nicer than your car dealerships. But it's always a process. How did you get started in documentaries?
I got a high 8 video camera from my grandfather. That was the first camera I had, and I loved it, and I just kept shooting. And then this is a funny story. I interned in 7th grade a week at this filmmaker's. He's a cinematographer's little shop. It's a mandatory thing that you do in Germany as part of your education. You go out into the world for 2 weeks and witness something that you're interested in. And I went to that place, and above his little shop was a couple that were part of. There was a terrorist organization in Germany, ARF, that they kidnap people, politicians mostly. There was like hardcore left wing, and they kill people. It was a big deal in Germany. Like changed the entire landscape of how policing works in Germany now. But those 2 people were active part of that, and they ran sort of the publicity operation for the ARF, and I got friendly with them, and they had an entire like U-matic studio. So like U-matic before Betacam, they had this like U-matic cameras and huge like decks, like the videotape recorders to put the anyway, and they just had it standing around, and so they offered for me to take it with me, and I took it, the whole thing. My dad came with a truck and picked up the entire thing. It's like a spaceship full of stuff. And And then I started a television station in my town. We got a permission from the state to broadcast 1 hour per week into the local cable network on Sundays. And so my friends and I made little pieces, like little news pieces about what's happening in the town, and interview people, the mayor and even the priest, and did all these little things. And it was like the most amazing time. So we became a little news station, and the town loved it. And I just knew I was gonna do something like that. And when I was 16, my father is a scientist. He wanted me to go to like a specific school for, engineers and physics and chemistry and whatnot. And I said, I can't do that. I'm creative. I want to. And then he said, well, then you cannot live in my house. And so I left at 16.
Jeez.
And started a job and became an editor. And then I edited for 10 years. I became really successful in editing. Like at 19, I had to lie about my age. I had to, I edited feature documentaries, and I built this whole post-production house in the capital. And yeah, that's how it started. I'm sorry, that's a long story.
No, that's fantastic. Everyone so far, like, we've done about 14 interviews, and everyone kind of has the same, like, and I was the same way, grabbed like a high 8 VHS camera, just started shooting, fell in love with it. But that really, your story really takes an interesting turn. How has editing affected the way that you shoot? Because I know for sure once in college, I was bouncing around. I knew I wanted to do cinematography, but you do stuff for your friends. You're working on other projects. You're doing multiple jobs as you're learning. And I have continued to edit my own stuff or stuff for other people, color correction, and they've all informed my cinematography.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
what shots wild? To get, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's totally true for me too. And actually, the person that took me in when I was 16 was a really well-known and talented cinematographer. And I said, I want to be a DP, and he was like, well, you need to edit first to understand. He said, do 3 years of editing, and then you become and I sort of like loved it at that point so much. And I was like a young kid and became so successful. And so that got to my head. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be an editor. This is amazing. I made like day rates and stuff at like 17. And so I just edited longer. But to your question, it's interesting because I do think that the process of editing really, really informed the way I think about story and how the nuances of how to tell a story and what you need to really actually tell it. That really helped me. And then in some ways it was in the beginning when I started shooting actually counterproductive, because I shot for shots. I went for shots, and I had to dial that back over the years to really, when you have a moment, it's not first about the shots. It's about the energy. It's about the dynamic between two people. And if it's gripping, that's not the first instinct to like hold 5-second shots. And then you have, it's about holding the shot and drifting. And so I had to really grow out from that, I guess. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, it informed everything. It informed so much about how I think as a cinematographer, in how to tell a story.
Yeah, because I guess there's two parts to it, right? There's like the mechanical, like, will this shot cut together with this shot? But then, like you were saying, the emotional. That's something I definitely had to learn. Is I would get in the habit. I started off like one of my earlier jobs was filming concerts, all the concerts that would come through where my college was, and I would get in this habit of I'd be filming, and I would be like, "That's awesome!" And the second I thought that's awesome, I'd pull the trigger and stop the clip. So I would get in the edit, I would get all these things where I'm like, "This is amazing," and then the clip ends, and I'm like, "What am I doing?"
Yeah.
Were there any lessons like that you've learned on the job that you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
Yes, exactly like what you just described. I did that all the time. In the beginning, when I first started shooting, I was like, and what was funny is that because I was also editing, I was working a lot for a European organization called Arte, it's like a BBC version of sort of Europe's mainland. It's a collaboration between Spain, Germany, and France and Switzerland. And they have, a big, solid budgets for documentary and whatnot, and offices around the world. And I would very quickly, when people realized, oh, that guy can shoot and edit, they would send me like to anything that happened, like any, like, like hostile situations and floods in Africa and whatnot. So I would travel and then I would shoot, and then I would come home and edit my own shit and submit packages, like 15-minute mini documentary packages to them. And that's when I realized, dude, like, don't do that. Like, don't cut when you think you have the shot. Like, isn't that so interesting? Like, and I still think this every single day when I shoot Verite, it's like, when my instinct is to like, okay, I got it, this is great, is like, then like you go the extra mile and stay another hour.
Yeah,
because there's always something you hadn't even anticipated. That's the beauty of documentary too. Like, there's all the stuff you didn't anticipate is what really, and then understanding how that could actually be important, and then following that and sort of letting you guide by what's happening. I think that's some of the things I've learned is don't ever stop. And that was also part of the biggest conversation we had in our initial meeting, when all the cinematographers were there. It's like, we don't cut. Like, there's no cutting. We're not going away. Those kids from day one need to understand we're going to be there and we're going to roll on everything. Yeah, it's really interesting. I just shot a documentary about COVID and the frontline medical workers in the hospitals. And it was brutal because we spent, 10, 12 hours in the hospital every single day with like a full nurse's shift or full physician shift, from like picking them up at home, driving to the hospital, see 15 people die, all with masks on, and then drive back home with them. And you're like, by the time you get to the house with them, they had a 14-hour day, I had a 15-hour day, but then the juicy stuff comes after that.
right.
When they call them wives, or when they call friends, or when they just break down. And like, to like just tell yourself, I just got such intense footage for 14 hours, amazing scenes full of trauma and emotions and everything. And sure, I could call it a day, but like, the real stuff is going to come later. And it was a reminder every single day that like, when you think you got it, it's like, no, this is when you start.
How do you stop yourself from sort of directing as you're shooting? Because, as the camera person, especially when the subject trusts you, I feel like there can be an instinct to, obviously you're going to move them toward like, hey, actually, could you stand towards a window real quick? But like, even prodding, you see, like you were just saying, these people come home and start calling their friends. Do you go, obviously you wouldn't do this, but as an example, like, speak up, that kind of thing. How do you if you can tell that there's some mechanical reason that you're not going to get that shot, how do you navigate that?
I mean, I guess that's it. That is a lot of what I do is sort of one person banding, and I over the years really have learned that it is a huge difference between two people in the room, two crew members, and that means like a director and a cinematographer versus just one. It's huge.
Yeah.
Because that sort of dynamic of them and us goes away. And so for that reason, I've been focusing on projects where I can do that, where directors trust me, or where I can co-direct and be completely by myself, build a intimate relationship with people. And some of that we did in Boise State. In the beginning, we didn't hire sound people for that reason, and then realized very quickly that actually that was not a good idea, because it's often 90 kids in a room yelling at the same time. So we actually had to dial it back and hire sound people. But those were also not intimate situations. But I firmly believe that they absolutely no interactions when I film with my subjects, even if I fuck it up or I notice like I'm gonna miss it. I do occasionally. I would like when there's a phone call, when the phone rings before they pick up, and I know that's going to be an important call, I would say, could you put it in loudspeaker? Something like that. It depends on the situation, who it is also, like what my relationship is with them, but I would never ask them to like stand somewhere else or like move over there. I would just like, I guess that's part of the dance of the choreography, is like anticipating what's happening and then being in the right space, in the right location for the light, and between the light and my subjects and what I want to film. I guess like that's when you master it, you anticipate that, and often it works. Sometimes you fuck it up. It doesn't work. It's the game. But I think it, like, to me, variety filmmaking is really about not interacting. Like it's an interesting dynamic, and we discussed this actually quite often talking about Boys State. Is like, when do you put the camera down and now there's some need to interact with your subject, and you feel that, like with Steven when he breaks down in the end.
Yeah,
we all put the camera down. That was one of the very few times we put the camera down. We hugged him, we cried with him. Like there was no need to continue. We could have continued, but there was a need for us to be with him in a direct way. And sometimes it happens. You put it down. What's that?
Be more human about it instead of
be more human about it. Yeah. But other than that, I try not to direct as much as I can on documentaries. Just let accept reality as for what it is.
Yeah.
Which that's really special about Jesse and Amanda and as directors, because there's so many directors that come into a project with their own vision and thinking this is the story, this is what we want to tell, and Jesse isn't like that. He embraces that, and he makes sure that he understands what's happening, and then he positions himself to be in a position to follow that and to let the story guide him, but he doesn't come in with a preconceived idea of what this is going to be. And it's really big, because a lot of directors, I so often feel like you're not listening. Just listen and let that guide you, and don't try to make a film that you had in mind. Be it like, Werner Herzog said it best. It's like, if you come back with a documentary project you set out to get, then you have made a big mistake.
Yeah. That's an excellent point, because I've interviewed a lot of documentary filmmakers for this podcast, and they all kind of share the same. I have not shot a lot of documentary. I mostly shoot, like I said, starting off, it was concerts or events or anything like that, where there are elements of verite to it. I'm not like, especially with a concert, you're not going to interact with the musician while they're performing. But at the same time, in my head, I'm like, this is going to look cool. It's all about looking cool. They want to look cool. The project needs to look cool.
Yeah.
And there's not so much of a ethics to it like there is in documentary. You're not making a music video in Boys State. You're making a
right.
I almost said a living document. Talk to me about the sort of mechanical workflow of shooting this thing. So you're saying you're filming for 12 hours a day, let's say 14 hours a day. You're just cruising through cards, I assume. What happens at the end? Who's like, you're handing it off? How's it getting logged and captured and all that? And like, what made it easier for you guys?
Yeah, so I think each shooter shot maybe about 10 to 12 hours per day, sometimes a little less. Like, you're not rolling all the goddamn time. Sometimes there's just really a dull moment and you cut. And you need to eat and stuff. So it's not like we didn't get 12 hours of footage from each shooter each day. Sometimes that was the case, but most of the time it was like 8-10 hours. And we had enough cards. I think everybody had like 10 512 gigabyte cards. That was plenty. And we did have one assistant for everybody, and she would occasionally like try to catch you on the campus and get some media from you. So to get a head start, but we had a team of downloaders who had like a whole, like, I think 4 computer station, and they worked in not a 24-hour, but like some overlapping time situation where one of them came in like late morning, and the other one stayed until like super late. And so they were able to like download 4 cards at the same time, I think, and like all the fast cards. And so I think it took like 20 minutes per card. It wasn't that bad, but they still got a lot of stuff. But they kept track, and we would there wasn't a whole lot of communication between the shooters or the crews with like the post people really, but it was like there was always a producer or director in our big war room in one of the dorms, where we would come in and check in. And it was actually quite beautiful, because a lot of the times everybody was excited about what their character did or what happened, and it's like, oh my god, this was an amazing moment, and oh, guess what, I got this, and then this is going to happen tomorrow. And so they would download, and sometimes like people at the same time. And Amanda is brilliant in the way her brain works. She's wicked smart, and she would take that all in, write it down, and some of it copy to the big, huge whiteboard we had to keep track of it. So it was like a verbal relaying information to the directors and producers from all the people, and then they would sort of lock that in. And then obviously, like in post, there's a few months of screening. I think Jeff screened like 3 months just watching. It was long. And Amanda also, they watched everything, every frame shot. They rewatched that, which is it was a big job. Yeah,
that was going to be my next question, is like, how do you, there's some that I wish that would get installed in cameras, and that's like the, ooh, this is a good moment metadata tag.
Yeah.
You know, just something where you could click it and it'll like save a point, and,
right.
And so you could bring that up in the edit. Was there any of that like physically done, where the shooter would be like, oh, you know, at it, whatever the time was, this is like something is good, or they just were like, we're going to watch it anyway, so it doesn't matter?
I mean, the only thing that happened was this, like, you know, the conversation at the end of the day or the next morning, like, hey, this is like my highlights. But it was all verbal. Like, we would talk to Amanda and Jesse, and we would, and sometimes we would even like get a bunch of 6-packs and sit somewhere outside at like 1 o'clock in the morning having a beer, and we would exchange stories that we experienced. Because for Amanda and Jesse, it was impossible to be at all 7 shooters all the time, right? It's like, it's really hard to give up that. So it was a lot of talking. Yeah.
Were there any moments?
I don't think anybody was like logging any moments. Like, you just, you know, you were too exhausted and too focused on what you're doing to like do anything. If any, we would sometimes text to the group chat saying like, hey, I think I'm hearing like this group is like having a special event at 5 here. Maybe we should have a second shooter there, and the team would react to that if they needed to. It was more logistical.
Were there any moments for you that stood out that like you sort of gave you chills while you were filming?
Yeah, certainly the moment with Steven when he didn't win, and when went back and called his mom, and it was especially emotional because I knew Steven from the beginning, and I spent this time with him campaigning, and he was very private about where he comes from, and you know, as an immigrant, he wasn't comfortable to bring us into his house, and not like a lot of the other kids who lived lavishly with filthy rich parents. He was different, but I like your setup. So for a lot of the kids, or for some of the kids, like going into this, you would at least think, oh, maybe this is like a nice summer camp for them. For Steven, it was always more. For Steven, this was like, he was into politics. He was like campaigning for Beto. He's like giving speeches already. He's like in there, like hanging out with the crew, like in the local canvas offices, and like really like being interested in this. And for him, it this meant a lot. And it just knowing all that and having spent all this time with him when he didn't win, and he I knew how important this was to him, and I expected him to slam the door in my face and say, "Get the fuck out of here, I'm done,"
Right.
which a lot of people would have done. But to be invited into this moment and for him to let me in and be right there means a lot, and it meant a lot in that moment. I was super emotional, and we had a beautiful talk afterwards. And it's one of those rare moments when what you do and what you try to do to build a relationship with people and to connect with them and to be there with them, but also keeping a certain distance to them, when that actually works. Often you try to build that, and then in the key moments they shut you out because they can't handle it, or they don't want to share. So yeah, that was a meaningful moment.
Yeah, I did notice. This isn't quite a cinematography question, but there did seem to be, like you were saying, the summer camp aspect. It did seem like a lot of those kids, like when they're doing the bills, when they're coming up with bills and stuff, and kids are like, whatever, no farting on Thursdays, like just
I
complete
know. Yeah.
nonsense. How much of those? What would you say like the ratio was between your Stevens and your goof off kids?
Man, that's really hard to tell. I think there was a really like the American Legions, they did a pretty good job with like school counselors and to sort of go through like there's a thorough sort of like application process that included an interview, and a lot of the kids were like in debate, whatever, like I don't know, groups in their schools, or were
Mhm.
like already like politically involved in something. And a lot of the kids came there with serious intentions, but then it's also like 17-year-old boys.
I
They're still
honestly like
kids.
the first watching it, I had huge first 2 weeks of college vibes. Like I went to Arizona
Yeah.
State, which was a big party
Yeah.
school, and like those
Yeah.
first 2 weeks, I still remember vividly. And it's
Yeah.
this weird like the energy off. You're suddenly meeting hundreds of new people who like.
Yeah.
How do I reflect off those folks?
Right.
Was
Right.
there because this was in Texas, a lot of the kids leaned pretty conservative. Would you, was that something that Boys State sort of selected for, or was that only because it was in Texas? Because it did seem like there was a lot of kids who were like, I'm a good conservative like anyone else, and then they'd start saying, but I campaigned for Bernie, and it's like, well, then you're not a conservative. You're just saying that because these people are listening.
Right. I mean, that was so fascinating to us that I mean, first of all, they understood the political process, and
Yeah.
it's a conflict that a lot of real life politicians have all the time. Where do they stand? How does that resonate with their base, with their state, or um, and then on top of that, they got randomly selected into the two groups. So no matter where they came from, they still had to get on board with the party line, whatever they decided to do, right?
Right.
And yes, like Texas was interesting. I mean, we read, Jesse and Amanda read this Washington Post article that had come out the year before, where the kids in Texas, the Texas boy state, the previous year, they had voted to secede from the union.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's brought up in the documentary.
And it was like, that was like a big slap in the face of the American legions, that they did not want that, but it still happened. And so
Right.
that's what drew our attention to Texas. And obviously, Texas is politically a fascinating cosmos. Really, it has a lot of liberal little nooks in the bigger towns, but then it's widely so conservative, so deeply conservative and religious. And for us, that was it's a big conversation, a national conversation all the time. What does Texas think? Where's Texas at? And so it made it double interesting because of that.
Yeah, Texas definitely has its own self-imposed solo behavior. I grew up in California, and
Yeah.
obviously we're always the target of everyone's anything, but from day one, you just know of Texas is like, there's America and then there's Texas. And that whole don't mess with Texas thing was about littering.
Yeah.
But they took it as like, no, we mean that all the time. Like it's very braggadocious, very bravado driven.
Yeah.
Which I've always wondered if like that's the identity of the country that we're all supposed to take on, or if that's the one that's leaving, or what, is that old? Is that current? I've always wondered about that as it pertains to the rest of the country.
Right. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No.
I was going to say.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Was there anything that you noticed in the kids that gave you a surprise or hope or even potentially sadness? Anything that the kids taught you, sort of?
That's a good question. I was inspired by the way those kids went pretty deep in what they discussed, at least the ones that took it seriously. And I didn't expect that depth from 17-year-olds. I expected a lot more like, this is a big spring break party time and we're just gonna have a good time. But it became really passionate for a lot of the kids. And some of the kids actually changed the way they looked at things because of conversations they had. No, that was actually fascinating that there were conversations that I filmed where you could see that something they had, like abortion, right? Like there's a lot of kids from rural Texas that have very, very like indoctrinated views on how that should be handled. And some of the healthy conversations actually opened the eyes to kids, and they learned to have a conversation with the other side. We heard that so many times that there's at least what I walk away with from this week is, even if I have a profoundly different opinion or sensibility to a certain issue, at least I can find a healthy way to talk with the other side. I heard that many times, and that was beautiful to see. And just the pure energy and how they went into this. Some of these kids were fighters and they wanted to win and they wanted to like get shit done, and just like masculinity, just like young kids, like they're zest for life, and this like feeling of we can conquer the world was really inspiring and beautiful. And I'm pretty sure that some of those kids, this was a long-lasting impression on them.
Oh, there's definitely something to be said for those. Like I said, it reminded me of the first 2 weeks of college, but at the same time, it also reminded me of like I went to a film school that was like a 6-week intensive over at Universal Studios. And like, I made friends for life there. I mean, 6 weeks is a lot longer than 1 week, but like, I remember like every minute of that. And it was very formative for me. It's meeting. It was the first time I had met, like, I grew up in a town of 5,000 people. We were all pretty much the same.
Right.
We had mildly different backgrounds, but we all, when your high school has 80 people, you all just learn to get on and get over it. There's no tension there.
Yeah.
So meeting people from outside areas and that initial, especially for something like this with a lot of boys, I assume there was a lot of pecking order type stuff. You see that one guy's name who was like, I was just making the whole thing up, trying to figure out how I was going to win.
Robert.
Yeah. Rob, like he's, immediately he took alpha mode. He's like going from person to person, like, I'm going to win. And everyone's like, shit, man. Okay. Yeah. Here you go. Signed, whatever.
Yeah. And some of that in Robert is that Robert is one of the kids that really like did a 180 on some of the things he said. And his revelation to actually admit that whatever opinion you have, sometimes go with whatever is liked best by the people. You have to lie, essentially. That's what. But Robert also has a real alpha father, super successful guy, and there was a good portion of that was like trying to impress his dad. That's my hunch, anyways. He was like, I'm gonna come home. I'm gonna be governor. I want to impress my dad.
Right.
There's a lot of that is also played into that, I think.
Sure. Well, we're about up on time, and I'm sure you've clearly got some things going on at the house. But I like to end each interview with two questions. The first one being, what is an everyday thing, whether it be a way of life or an object? One person said light meter, another person said comfy shoes, another person said kindness. One thing that every day has made you a better cinematographer, or something you take with you no matter what you're doing in a work situation. And the second question is, feel free to plug anything that you want to plug, any personal projects or anything like that.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean? Sorry, that I may not.
Oh, just like if there's another project on the horizon that you want to get people excited about.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. It's a bunch of things, but I think curiosity is what gets me going every single day, to listen, to inquire. Kindness is a good one too, because that's a big part of it is being kind. But yeah, for me, I'm curious to hear people's stories. And I'm super excited about this COVID documentary. We just had we found a name for it. It's called The First Wave.
Oh, that's a good name.
One of the most amazing variety projects I've ever worked on. It's directed by Matt Heineman, who directed Cartel and a bunch of other documentaries and also fiction films. And we're grading next week. We're premiering at a big major film festival very soon, hopefully outside somewhere in the park where people can actually come. And yeah, it's been a real ride to see the dark side of the first wave in New York firsthand through the eyes of medical frontline workers. It was a beautiful time to work, and it's a beautiful film. It's a really, really powerful film. So I'm super excited for that to sort of meet the world.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back on and we can talk about that one. Because that's going to be man, it's only been on our mind every second of every day for a year now.
I know.
It'll be nice to see it sort of not simplified, but codified into like something digestible, because we only have our own experiences for what it is.
Right.
And man, that was the weird thing was, you go your whole life, people telling you that you're doing a career that'll never go anywhere. And then I was the only one employed. People still needed stuff edited. People still had things that needed to be colored. So
that's amazing.
Getting those gigs, but
that's amazing. Good for you,
buddy. Just praise be, man. I don't know who who's smiling down on me, but I appreciate it.
Yeah. Totally. I know. And I feel so much for the people that were even more isolated because they couldn't work and they couldn't see people. It's like, for me, it was similar. My reality really just didn't change. I just kept working. Yeah. And, and then I never got COVID during that project, which was a miracle because I was like right there. Like, I remember the first time I was in one of those rooms and somebody coded and stopped breathing and everybody rushing in. And I was like, there was like a FaceTime situation and I was trying to get the angle to see the person they were holding, the iPad over his face. And I was like down low to see him in the foreground, to see the iPad of the family members saying goodbye. And then you feel the sweat running down on your face, into your eyes. And you're like, this is like, and at this time, like we were all so freaked out. We didn't know what the hell, how you get it. And
right.
Like, okay, this is the moment you're going to get, this is like, boom, right? Like if your hair is full of COVID, like, and then that never happened. And I got COVID this January, like almost a year later, filming out in San Diego. Actually, I was shooting for a week out there with people that refuse to wear masks. And
San Diego.
And then I got it, and I feel like, I don't know, like, it wasn't that bad.
I mean, for a lot of people, it wasn't. I know like 4 or 5 people who got it, and they just went right about their day. It didn't really affect them that much.
Yeah. So it's really hard to like accept that, like, okay, we do this because we couldn't get the hospitals overflowed. We did this to protect the weak and the sick. But really, did we need to change the entire society like this for this? What I mean? Like, and I don't really mean to sound arrogant, but that does pop into your head. Like, wow, what a crazy time this was.
In hindsight, obviously 2020, you realize the year too. Like you said, we didn't know. For all we knew, like every step, I remember the line, 5 people in Ralph's at a time,
Yeah, I know.
But hopefully and leadership was also a bit of an issue. But hopefully next time we run into a national emergency, we'll be a little more prepared as a group.
As a nation, I hope so, yeah. Hey, it's been so nice talking to you. I have to jump, but
really love it.
Thank you so much for doing this. I can't wait.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate your time.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by Pro Video Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F@R Matbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.